the member banks, and the people.
Right.
And here's how the scheme works. The Congress has the idea that it cannot create money. It must borrow it.
Now, this is totally against the Constitution.
Well, the Constitution says the Congress shall create money. Any sovereign nation has the ability to create money.
And that has never been amended.
No, of course not.
And you can only change the Constitution with an amendment.
That's right.
Right, and they passed some law.
It's the Federal Reserve Act of 1913.
It's an unconstitutional law.
Well, it enabled a private bank.
Private banking consortium.
That's right. To issue the money and to expand the money supply and actually control the money supply. In fact, Congress has delegated this responsibility to the banks, and the banks are charging interest for this thing. Let me show you how it works.
Right.
Congress decides it needs to borrow money because there's never enough money in circulation, right? Mm-hmm. It's always being sucked up by interest.
Right.
It's all debt money. So it passes a law raising the national debt, let's say by $1 billion. It authorizes the United States Treasury to issue $1 billion worth of bonds. The Federal Reserve purchased this $1 billion of bonds by the simple expedient of opening up a checking account for the government and giving the government a checkbook.
It cost them a checkbook for
It cost them a checkbook.
$1 billion.
That's right. Now the U.S. Treasury then writes all of these checks to the people. It pays its civil servants, the aerospace industry, the welfare payments, the Medicare, the Medi-Cal, the health education and welfare, the energy programs, all of the huge expenses of the Social Security, pensions, all the huge expenses are covered by these checks. The people cash these checks, they put them into banks. The bank then sends the check back to the Federal Reserve where it's cleared. When the check is cleared, the government's checking account is debited, and it can be debited to zero, and the next year or next 6 months or the next day, I guess it's the next day these days, Congress will have to make another law extending the national debt. Now, here's the tricky part of this. When people put money into these banks, okay, the bank has the right to lend out, let's say 90 or 95% of that money as a loan. Let's say that I deposit $10,000 into this bank, okay? Now the bank can lend out $9,000 to somebody. He can put it in another bank, and guess what? That bank can lend out 90% of that $9,000 to somebody else who puts it in another bank, and they can lend out 90% of that $9,000. So by a process of going from bank to bank, the original $10,000 you put into the bank can multiply up to $100,000. This is the same kind of scheme that this bank is using to create money out of nothing and to charge interest for the privilege.
Scheme is the right word. This is the
yes.
swindle of the century.
Well, it would be several centuries, actually.
Yes.
So when the bank writes you a check for your house, let's say you want to mortgage your house for $200,000, the bank creates the money out of nothing by this scheme of multiplying credit.
It's called fractional banking?
Fractional reserve money deposit expansion system is the exact name for it. Or the debt, I just call it the debt usury money system or the dumb system.
The dumb system.
When you take a mortgage on your house for $200,000, it's very unlikely you'll ever be able to pay that off, in actual fact, because there really is not enough money in the economy ever to pay off this debt. There's $11 trillion of debt out here. There's $4 trillion of debt here for a total of about $15 trillion. The total money in circulation probably doesn't exceed a couple of $1 trillion.
Right.
So there's no end to this but default. In other words, your house will eventually be owned by the bank. Now you may refinance, you may do all sorts of things, okay? But somebody is eventually going to end up with your house, is going to default on it.
And they're going to eventually end up with our country.
The banks will be the most powerful nation in the world. Now what does the federal government put up for collateral, do you think, on its loan?
I don't know.
All the gold in Fort Knox, number one, and all the federal lands. That includes the national parks and most of Alaska. Tremendously valuable. When the government defaults, as it must, because there's not enough, it could tax people all it wanted to.
Right. It could cut its budget to zero.
It could cut the budget to zero.
Because of compound interest, this debt is going to increase exponentially.
That's right.
At an ever-increasing rate, regardless.
That's right.
So all this, but all this talk about how we should cut spending and raise our taxes so we can deal with this deficit and this debt is nonsense.
It will not work. It cannot work because the entire money supply has become a debt money supply. Early on in the game, we had honest money circulating out there, and the debt money was a little bit. And so the interest could actually be paid by taking honest money out of circulation. But now that's all gone. Now all we can take out of circulation is debt money, you see, which doesn't do anything to the debt because you now have to borrow more debt to get it into circulation.
In other words, since it's all debt money, right?
There's no hope for a recovery.
There's no hope because every effort to pay the debt is you're paying it with debt money.
By financing it, yes, by getting more money.
To pay the debt causes more debt.
That's right. Government is borrowing the interest.
Borrowing the
which now you get this compounding interesting exponential increase. You know, $4 trillion, if you look at it, if the government were to spend $4 billion a year for 1,000 years and not have any income, it would take 1,000 years for the government to build up this kind of debt. It's increased to $4 trillion. Our government's only 200 years old. It increased to $400 trillion by this magic of compounding, which is the ninth wonder of the world, it's called, where money just grows by itself automatically.
Incredible. You don't have to have an IQ above room temperature to see that this is a scam.
It's a scam, and it's a dangerous thing.
What is the alternative? How can we fix this?
Well,
is there a way of fixing it?
Of course there is. It's a very simple solution. Congress has to simply exercise its constitutional prerogative that any sovereign nation has of issuing its own money. How it would work is this. Congress would, first of all, cancel the 1913 Federal Reserve Act, which enabled banks to expand the money supply and to create the money supply.
Which Jefferson warned us was the most dangerous thing we could possibly do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hamilton instituted the United States Bank, which was directly under the control of the Treasury. That never happened. He was a brilliant man, Hamilton was. Anyway, the Treasury would then become the banker and issue its own money. Does it issue it out of anything? Does it have to be backed by gold and silver? No, any more than the Federal Reserve notes are backed by gold and silver. It's the regulation of the money supply that's important, not the backing of the money. And the Treasury could certainly do that. Now, what it would do is to lend the banks money. It would create the money lent to the banks. See how the tables have been turned here? The banks now owe interest to the Treasury. The banks would increase the interest rate and lend it to the people. So at the same time you're making your house payment, you're paying your taxes. There's no need for an income tax.
That's lovely. I like that.
Okay. The government will never more be in debt. In fact, it's in a positive cash flow now because it's creating money that the banks are paying for.
In fact, it'll always have a surplus.
Always have a surplus, right. The government may have to destroy some money.
Right.
Okay? But that's not our problem now. Our problem is a terrible depression we're in because the banks are taking money out of circulation due to interest payments.
You call it a depression. I think it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you see, the banks can't really lend any more money out because there's no collateral. All the collateral is already mortgaged. The government is fully mortgaged. All the federal lands are mortgaged. Yeah. My house is mortgaged, my refrigerator, my car. People can't borrow money because they aren't credit worthy.
And so everybody's paying interest.
And the people that are paying interest keep decreasing the money supply, but there are no valid lenders. And so the money supply drops rapidly because the interest payments are destroying it, and the banks can't lend any money, more money into circulation. Right. In fact, what the banks are doing, investing in United States Treasury bonds. I think they know the government's going to go broke and they want those federal lands.
Yes.
My opinion. Okay. So the United States Treasury creates the money. Now there's another way the Treasury can get money into the economy, okay?
Yeah,
that's making interest-free loans to cities.
Interest-free loans?
Yes. Let's take Pasadena. Let's say it owes $1 billion in municipal bonds. Okay. Over a 15 or 30-year period, however the bonds mature, Pasadena is going to have to pay back $4 billion. Now this is a miracle of compound interest again. Yeah. Now, if Pasadena instead would borrow $1 billion from the Treasury, it could immediately pay off its $1 billion debt. Now, the taxes that Pasadena collects, 3/4 of those taxes will be surplus.
And that would allow it to invest in itself.
Yes. It could fix up its infrastructure.
Yes.
And that way, our cities could be beautiful. And it's very important. Economists agree now that investing in the infrastructure is the best and most successful way to get money circulating to the system. The city has to hire contractors to fix up the buildings, to fix up the roads. These people spend money. Car salesmen have to hire more salesmen. Everybody goes to work. The money circulates. The good thing about this money is that it stays in circulation.
Yes.
I think that cities eventually have to return the money and it goes out of circulation. But this is certainly a way to get it to begin with. But this money will not. Well, this money comes back in circulation too. So all of the money comes back, but it comes back at a decent rate, and the government can control the rate at which it's going out.
Charles, we have about 1 minute left. Can you summarize
Yes.
for us the most important concept here?
Congress is the answer to this. Congress created the money system the way it is. Congress created the original money system. Congress can set it all right. What I want everybody out there to do is to call your congressman about once a month and say how you're coming along with the debt-free money system. We want you to phase out the Federal Reserve notes and to put in honest Treasury money. Now, if you call him once a month, and we have 1,000 people doing that, he'll get 300 calls a week. That should alert him to the fact that there's another way to use money other than borrowing it.
Thank you, Charles. We're going to have you back because I know there's a great deal more that we want to cover and get into. There have been times in our history when we have not used a debt money system, and those have been the times of greatest prosperity and greatest abundance. The times that we have been on the debt money system, like now, things have gone to hell in a handbasket. So I think the most important thing you can do, in addition to writing or calling your congressman, is to simply tell your friends and neighbors what you have learned here today, because the elite media is not going to do it. In 50 years of network media, they have never done even one documentary on the Federal Reserve System. In fact, their job, I think, is to hide it. So you and I have to take that responsibility. It's the responsibility of each one of us to convey the information to everyone who might be willing to